This is part 2 of a series of videos about what to do after you print your woodcut. So if you missed part 1, I talked about how I tear my paper down to the right size after I print. And today I'm going to talk about what happens if you get a little bit of ink somewhere you don't want it. And if it's just a little subtle area, you don't necessarily have to get rid of your whole print. I'm sure there's lots of printmakers who may disagree with me, but this is how I like to operate. And this comes out of making giant woodcuts. So I've made woodcuts that are 8 feet tall well, each block is 4 foot. The whole piece would be 35 feet. And so when you're printing giant woodcuts, I print them by hand, and it takes me 8 hours to make one print of a 4 by 8 foot block. And so if I'm printing with a spoon for 8 hours and I get a little bit of ink somewhere I don't want it, I'm not going to ditch my print and print it again. I think that's a little bit silly, and that's just how I like to operate. But the example today I'm showing is on a smaller piece just because it's easier to show on the screen here. So I have this woodcut from my woodcut graphic novel, Solitude. And you can see the corner here. Got a little bit of ink, a little notch or something with the wood. And I'm not so super satisfied with how that looks. So I want to just clean it up. And so I have an Xacto knife, and to make sure that it is clean, carefully put a wipe and make sure there's nothing on it. And if you're very careful, you can use the knife, and you need to have it more parallel to the paper than perpendicular. If you're doing this perpendicular to the paper, you're going to poke a hole. It's no good. You want it parallel, almost flat, and you can just start scraping very carefully. And this works depending on your paper. You can do this in different directions as well. I start by scraping in a couple of directions, and then I'm going to scrape this way. And what you're doing is just want to scrape off the very top little bit of paper without making it noticeable, without making a hole. And the heavier your paper, the easier this is. Thinner your paper, you're not really going to be able to do it. This print is on Saunders Waterford. It's a hot press watercolor paper. Fairly hardy. So this works pretty well. And then take a clean eraser. So this was an eraser. I was drawing with it. You can see it kind of got pencil on it. But I cleaned off this side of it. You just clean it off by rubbing it on a table or rubbing it on the wall. You want to make sure your eraser is clean. And just kind of scrub it. Scrub it pretty good. Then go in if there's anything that didn't come off that you wanted. And also, very, very important, do this when the ink is completely dry. If you're impatient and you do it, your ink is still a little bit tacky, you're just going to smudge and make it way worse, and it might not be salvageable anymore. So very important. And just hit it with a clean eraser. We are. Much better. Still go. It's important to go in different directions because it makes it less noticeable. And if you overdo it and it becomes like a really big noticeable hole, then you got to scrap the print. There. Another note, a lot of my woodcuts I like to paint after I print them. So I'll do watercolor on the print. Not on this one, but some of them. And if you do this on a print that you're going to paint, it's important, the watercolor will kind of pool in the section that you scraped away, and it might make it way more noticeable. So when you're painting, when the watercolor starts to pool, when it starts to dry, just take a dry brush or a clean brush, and just kind of get that water out of that little lip. It'll just collect in it, and it'll make a line of water. But if you take your brush and you move the water out of there, then it won't be noticeable at all. So this was part 2. how to tidy up your print if you make a mistake, especially handy, like I said, if you're making enormous woodcuts. You can work on smaller ones too. And in the last part, I'm going to talk about signing and numbering your prints. Thank you for watching.